Me and my siblings escaped an abusive household, fencing freedom and a chance to rebuild our lives. I remember the mornings the most vividly, the way the air seemed to crackle with tension before anyone spoke. My siblings, Ava and Sam, and I would move around the kitchen in near silence, only communicating with our eyes, understanding that even the smallest noise could draw unwanted attention. My parents, Robert and Lisa, were an unpredictable force of nature. Some days, Robert would be lost in his own world, staring out the window with a cigarette hanging from his mouth, his eyes narrowing into an abyss of discontent. On those days, Lisa would move through the house like a wraith, her voice low and sharp, cutting through the silence with whispered warnings. Other days, it was chaos, loud and violent, filled with the sound of objects breaking, doors slamming, and screams that seemed to echo long after they'd ended. I grew up feeling like I was always on stage, always acting, never knowing what part one was supposed to play. One wrong move, one misplaced word, and everything could unravel in an instant. There was an unspoken rule: stay small, stay silent, and hope they forgot you were there. It's strange, the things that stay with you. I remember one particular evening, sitting at the dinner table. The air was thick with a tension that had built up over days. Robert's glare was pinned on Sam, who was 7 at the time. Sam had spilled some juice earlier, and I could see the dried stain on the tablecloth, a glaring reminder of what was considered carelessness. "Look at that," Robert finally said, his voice a dangerous calm. "You see what happens when you're not paying attention?" Sam's eyes darted from the stain to his plate. He didn't dare answer. Ava, who was older than me, squeezed my hand under the table. I could feel her pulse racing as we sat frozen, unsure what would happen next. Lisa's chair scraped the floor as she stood up abruptly. "I'm tired of the excuses," she snapped, though no one had made one. She grabbed Sam by the arm, and he winced but didn't cry out. We'd learned early on that crying only made it worse. Ava's grip tightened on my hand, a silent reminder: stay still, don't move, don't speak. When Sam returned to the table, his eyes were red, but he kept them down, fixed on his plate. We ate the rest of our dinner in silence. Over the years, small rebellions became my way of coping. I would hide books under my bed, stories about adventures and faraway places where kids were free and parents were kind. Reading was my escape, my secret pocket of air in an otherwise suffocating world. Ava, too, found her way of rebelling. She'd sneak out at night, running through the fields at the edge of our property until her lungs burned and she felt alive again. Sam was different. He retreated inward, shrinking under the weight of each harsh word and raised hand. He would sit by the window for hours, staring out at the world he felt he couldn't be part of. I remember once asking him what he thought about when he looked outside. "I think about being a bird," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Birds don't have to stay. They can just fly away whenever they want." The turning point came one evening when Ava came back late from one of her nighttime escapes. The kitchen light was on, and Lisa was waiting, her arms crossed and lips set in a thin, angry line. Robert stood behind her, eyes shadowed by the dim light, an ominous figure that seemed larger than life. "Where were you?" Lisa's voice was a blade, cutting through the quiet of the house. Ava's eyes, usually so defiant, flickered with fear. She hesitated just a second too long. Robert stepped forward, the air shifting like a predator about to pounce. I couldn't take it anymore. Something inside me snapped, a rope that had been frayed for too long finally giving way. I stepped between Ava and Robert before I knew what I was doing. "She was with me," I said, my voice shaking but determined. "We were just sitting in the yard. We lost track of time." Robert's eyes met mine, and in that moment, I saw a flicker of something I couldn't name: surprise, maybe, or the recognition that I was no longer as small as they wanted me to be. The silence that followed felt like hours, and I could feel Ava's gaze burning into the side of my face, willing me to step back, to stop before it got worse. But Robert didn't raise his hand that night. He walked away, muttering under his breath, and Lisa followed, the two of them disappearing into the shadowed hallway. Ava let out a breath I hadn't realized she'd been holding, and Sam's wide eyes stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. The days that followed were different. The fear was still there, but something had shifted. I realized that fear only held power as long as we let it. Ava started talking about the future, about leaving when she turned 18 and taking us with her. Sam, for the first time, asked if I thought he could ever become a pilot. "We'll find a way out," I promised them one night as we sat by the window, watching the moonlight cast silver shadows across the floor. "One day, this will just be a memory, and we'll be free." And so we planned. Bit by bit, we saved scraps of money, and with each passing day, the air in the house felt a little less suffocating. The future no longer felt like a faraway dream. It was a seed growing inside us, fueled by whispered hopes and the silent bond that only we could understand. The plan came together in whispers and hurried looks. Late at night, when the creaking of the house was the only sound. Ava turned 18 in the spring, and the warmth of the season seemed to breathe life into our small acts of rebellion. We packed bags with only the essentials: clothes, a few cherished books, and a photo of us taken when we were younger, before life had hardened our eyes and hollowed our cheeks. The night we left felt like any other at first. Robert sat in his chair, a half-empty glass in his hand, muttering to himself as the TV droned on. Lisa was in the kitchen, her movements mechanical, lost in her own world. Ava, Sam, and I exchanged a look that held everything: fear, hope, and the unspoken promise that this was it, our only chance. Ava's voice was steady as she turned to us. "It's time," she whispered. Sam hesitated, glancing at Robert's silhouette. The fear was still there, etched deep into his small frame, but he nodded and took my hand. Ava led the way, her eyes darting to every shadow, every possible trap. We slipped through the back door, the creak of the hinges a gunshot in the quiet. I held my breath, waiting for the yell, the crash, but none came. The night swallowed us whole, the cool air rushing over our skin as we ran. The moon lit our path as we cut through the field behind the house, our feet pounding against the earth, hearts drumming in our chests. We didn't stop until the house was a dark speck in the distance, swallowed by the trees and the secrets it held. We found refuge at an old, creaking motel miles away from home. Ava had arranged it with money she had been saving for months. The man at the front desk barely glanced at us as we shuffled in, exhaustion and exhilaration fighting for space in our hearts. Inside the room, Sam collapsed on the bed, tears streaming down his face, not from fear, but from something new, something close to relief. "We did it," Ava said, her voice a mix of disbelief and triumph. She sank down next to Sam, pulling him into a tight embrace. I joined them, the three of us clinging to each other, like we were the only things tethering one another to this new reality. For the first time in years, we felt safe. The silence in that tiny room wasn't heavy or dangerous. It was peaceful, a blank canvas on which we could paint a new beginning. The days turned into weeks, and we settled into a routine. Ava found work at a diner, and I spent my days at a nearby library, reading stories to Sam and helping him with schoolwork. We talked about the future like it was a gift waiting to be unwrapped. Ava wanted to go to college someday. Sam spoke more and more about flying planes. One evening, as we sat on the small balcony outside our room, watching the sun set behind the rooftops, Ava reached for my hand. "You know we made it, right?" she said, her voice barely a whisper. "We're free." I nodded, the words catching in my throat. I looked at Sam, who was staring up at the sky, tracing the path of a bird flying overhead. His eyes reflected the deep blue of the twilight, full of wonder and possibility. "We did," I finally said. And for the first time, I truly believed it. The weight that had pressed down on me for so long had lifted, replaced by a fragile, beautiful hope. In that moment, we were no longer three frightened kids hiding in a world that threatened to break us. We were survivors, ready to rebuild our lives, one sunrise at a time. And as the last light of the day faded, I knew that no matter how many dark memories tried to chase us, we would never be trapped in that house again. We had found our wings, and we were flying. Please leave a like, comment and subscribe for more videos in the future.